and everybody's lost. So you have to keep the problem simple. I try to present problems that somebody in 4th or 5th grade would follow. Well, what are some of those? I think I follow what's called the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid, and I find that works best. Let me give some examples. Like Numbers 23:19 says God doesn't repent, but if you read Exodus 32:14, it says he does. If you read Exodus 33:20, it says no one has seen God face to face, and yet in Genesis 32:20, a man says, I've seen God face to face and my life is preserved. If you read 1 Kings 4:26, it says Solomon had 40,000 stalls for his horses. In 2 Chronicles, it says it was, this is 2 Chronicles 9:25, it says it was 4,000. In one instance, you have two contradictions in one verse. 2 Samuel 10:18 says David slew the men of 700 chariots. He's talking about horsemen. 700 chariots and 4,000 horsemen. Whereas in 1 Chronicles 19:18 it says it was 7,000 chariots, not 700, and 40,000 footmen, which is infantry as opposed to cavalry. Now I have scores of these. We could be here for a week reading all those off. Now, one of the things that the Christians have done to get out of these problems that I present is they have decided that one of the methods they could use is simply rewrite the text. In other words, if you can't solve it, just rewrite the Bible. And a classic example I always use is what's the 6th commandment say? 6th commandment. Oh, yeah, thou shalt not kill. The modern versions say thou shalt not murder. Now, why did they switch it from kill to murder? Well, if you believe in thou shalt not kill, how are you going to serve in the army? How are you going to be in the police force? How you can carry a gun around, for that matter? So they had so many people who were objecting and having problems with that verse that the modern versions, like the ASV, I'm sorry, not the ASV, that's the one that stayed with King James, like the New International Version, which is a fundamentalist version, they changed that to thou shalt not murder. So what I'm saying is, if you go back to the King James, you get the correct translation, but with these modern versions that have come out within the last 100 years, and there are a lot of them, they're changing the script in a lot of these to extract and remove these problems. They just simply rewrite the text. But if you go to the King James and check out the ones I just read, you'll see they're direct contradictions, no question about it. One of the major topics in the Bible is the resurrection. The resurrection is so important, according to Paul. This is in 1 Corinthians 15:14. He says, without the resurrection, our faith is in vain. In other words, the resurrection is so important that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity collapses as a religion. He's correct, it does. Because that's a fundamental tenet, one of the foundations. But let me read the problems with the resurrection. I have 4. Just like when he was on the cross, I had 5. With the resurrection, I have 4. First, we have this huge problem that Christians try to duck. Others rose before Jesus. Elijah raised a dead child. Samuel said to Saul, why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? Elijah raised the dead son of a Shunammite. The bones of Elijah were touched as a man was being lowered into a grave and the man came alive. Moses and Elijah rose at the time of the Transfiguration. The saints rose before the resurrection. Jairus' daughter rose from the dead. The widow at Nain's son rose from the dead. Lazarus rose from the dead. And all of these people rose before Jesus did. So by the time he rose from the dead, this was actually a rather common occurrence. I would have thought it would have been met by a resounding yawn, followed by, so what else can you do? Second major problem with the resurrection. The accounts conflict. Very conflicting in the Gospels. Let me give some examples. At what time in the morning did the women visit the tomb? Mark says at the rising of the sun. John says it was yet dark. On what day of the week did they arrive? Matthew says Saturday. Mark, Luke, and John say Sunday. Who came? John says Mary Magdalene. Matthew says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Mark says Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. And Luke says Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and the other women. Was the tomb open or closed when they arrived? Luke says it was open. Matthew says it's closed. Whom did they see at the tomb? Matthew says the angel. Mark says a young man. Luke says 2 men. John says 2 angels. I don't know whether it's men or angels. Were these men or angels? I don't know which they are. Were they inside or outside the tomb? Matthew says they were outside. Mark, Luke, and John say they were inside. Were they standing or sitting? Luke says they were standing. Matthew, Mark, and John say they were sitting. I've read about 80 of these, and I have 23. I could go on and on. I think you get the idea there. Third major problem with the resurrection. This is one that they try to duck. This is one I brought out when I was debating Peter Ruckman. He's a director of the Pensacola Bible Institute. I went on a radio show about 20 years ago, and I was supposed to talk about the Bible in general. And just before the show started, they said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to be debating Peter Ruckman." I said, "Oh, really?" They didn't tell me that at all. They just popped it up on me. I'd read a couple of his books, and I could have presented some of the points that I'd like to talk about with respect to his book. But, of course, I wasn't given an option because it was sprung on me. At any rate, I presented a problem he didn't like. He started getting very nasty on the radio, and I pretty well terminated our dialogue. And the problem I presented was this. He doesn't seem to realize that there's not going to be any resurrection of anybody. I'm not saying that. The Bible's saying it. Where does it say it? Read Ecclesiastes. All these Christians have to do is read Ecclesiastes 3:19-21, and I'm reading the Revised Standard Version. It says this, and mark these words closely. For the fate of the sons of the men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. No problem so far. They all have the same breath,